I wanted to say a word about different kinds of practice. So often when we meditate in a very bare kind of way. Uh, in Zen, it's spoken of as just sitting, shikantaza, just sitting. Choiceless awareness, spacious awareness, even just abiding as awareness. So it's a very receptive, bare kind of practice, which is really, really lovely. It's a lovely, lovely way to practice. On the other hand, as I feel my way in this online format, taking into account a wide range of people and their experience here, I'm going to lean a little more in probably to offering a few more suggestions than I might otherwise do. And frankly, if you want, you can always mute me and just practice as you like in community with another couple hundred people, literally from around the world. Pretty good. So it's okay, by the way, to release and to shed what's helpful to you to shed. I could feel the tension draining out of my body. I could feel the residues of the day, the accumulated busy, busy, zoom, zoom. I feel like I've been playing whack-a-mole in a very vegetarian way, you know, just all these things I've been dealing with. And I could just feel that draining as I meditated. It's okay to let go. It's okay to let go. It's also okay to let in. It's also okay to cultivate qualities, as I was suggesting, of this combination of peacefulness and lovingness together. It's like being at peace in a radiant heart, sending compassion and kindness in all directions, omitting none. So it's okay. It's okay to do that. It really is okay to do that. Okay. So what I'd like to do, if I could, is say a little bit, somewhat from a Buddhist perspective, not entirely, say something about or speak to anger and love at any time, including in the time of this pandemic that is beginning to move around the world. And then I'll open it up for discussion. And I'm going to try to actually not talk too much and maximize time for sharing and questions and discussion from other people. I just want to acknowledge, so that we can be mindful of it, the very understandable qualities of anger these days. Just being busy or having to reorient or dealing with the loss of things that used to be a kind of stress relief, like being able to be with other people, shake hands, things of that sort. Or anger at other people who don't get it, whatever it is, right? They're not worried enough, or they're too worried. Like, it can be a little irritable with them, a little exasperated. Anger in all its forms, subtleties of annoyance, subtleties of, are you kidding me? You know, whatever that might be, forms of righteousness. And so I'm just drawing your attention and encouraging you to see what your relationship is with anger in all its forms these days. Can you include it? Can you allow it? Can you allow it to be there without shaming yourself for having it? Can you allow it to be there without shaming yourself for having it, while also being judicious and appropriate in how you express it? One of the things that's been a real, almost fun kind of edge of practice, actually, is when people in my life who shall be nameless, although I've been married to one of them for 38 years. But anyway, people in my life do something like that's kind of like anti my program, or they don't immediately agree with my take about something, or I could just, or a reaction arises. What's really interesting is to ask oneself as close to real time as possible. So you're right in the real time, while accepting it, asking yourself, do I really need to get into this? And it makes me think about how these days, it feels like we're one of those people almost in a cartoon who's carrying 10 boxes and you're like, right? Maybe it's holiday shopping. Maybe you're home from the airport. You just got back from the market. You're carrying a lot of boxes. And then somebody says, well, yeah, but what about this? And they want to add one more thing. or they want to ask you a question, or they get in your way when you're trying to move your boxes into wherever you're going. And it's understandable that there's this sort of reaction. And it's important to realize that they're carrying a lot of boxes too. They might be invisible boxes. We don't really know, including what's just arising in their own mind, the stuff they're preoccupied with or worried about, but they're carrying a lot of boxes as well. So for me, it's been helpful to kind of think about, what am I adding to this other person? Do we really need to get into it? So part one is an awareness of anger. You know, anger is normal. It highlights things that are of concern, but in the metaphor in Buddhism, anger is like a honeyed tip with a poisoned barb. Or a parable or a metaphor in Buddhism, dumping anger on others is like throwing hot coals with bare hands. Both people get burned. So on the one hand, mindfulness of anger, really a useful thing. It's also very understandable if you stare at a TV set from time to time, the news, or you just hear something or read something, and you're just kind of stunned in outrage. And it reminds me of trips I've taken to Haiti, where particularly the first time I was there, I look back on that time, and as a fairly relaxed, mellow, somewhat, trained person, I was in a cold rage the whole time. I could not believe the situation there. I had been naive. I knew vaguely about the level of poverty in a country like that in various places, in fact, most of the country. I was in a cold rage. I was calm, I was clear, I wasn't hostile, and I was in a cold rage. And it felt healthy to be in a cold rage. It felt like the minimal moral response to that situation. So you may find yourself, understandably, stunned with outrage, appalled morally at various things, including failures of leadership at the very highest levels, obviously. As we saw this storm coming early in January, if not in December, we could see it coming as a predictable course. And in the face of all the denial and happy talk, here we are in mid-March, and it's literally just beginning. So it's understandable if there's some anger about that. It's okay. But we don't want to end there. We don't want to let it poison the heart. And that's where love comes in. Love is the natural antidote to anger. Not necessarily love for those that you are most angry with. That may be out of reach, although the ultimate levels of practice is very clear from around the world that we don't put them out of our heart, even if we have tremendous moral disapproval of whoever they may be. But what might be more in reach is to disengage from an angry reaction to someone you live with or know, or who just doesn't see it your way these days on Facebook, and ask yourself, are they stressed and scared too? I've been walking down a street and I see people and I watch them kind of shrink away. I watch myself kind of shrink away. Are you going to hurt me? Are you carrying an enemy on board that you don't even know about that might get me too, right? And that's understandable. And yet we can soften that reaction and we can realize they're carrying boxes too. They're stressed and scared too. They're scared too. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what's coming, just like me, right? And that feeling of including and common humanity is more important these days than ever, because we will get through this together or we won't get through this. That sense of common humanity is available. That sense of compassion for what you can see is the burden they're carrying, the weight, the load. And even moving into a kind of friendliness, a shared camaraderie, brothers and sisters in arms. When the storm comes, we're all in it. I've been reflecting lately about this poem from the poet Issa, Japanese, in reference to the cherry blossoms, which are in that culture, as I understand it, a symbol of both what is beautiful and wonderful in this world and how it is inherently impermanent. And the poem in the English translation is something like, under the cherry blossoms, there are no strangers. That's a paraphrase. Under the cherry blossoms, there are no strangers because we are all living amidst stunning beauty. And we are all, like the cherry blossoms, subject to arising and passing away. And I feel that under the storm of this pandemic, it's, which will pass eventually, we will get to the other side. And we will look back from the other side and we will reflect on what we did and didn't do and how we were with ourselves and with other people. And I want to look back on the other side and find a gladness and a self-respect in how I conducted myself, knowing that there's so much that's out of my control. So I focus on what is under my control, like whether I washed my hands or not, whether I let something small go and stayed out of a wrangle with another person, whether I tried to see the good in another person, even if I disagree with them. That's what I'm going to look back on. So finishing here, and then I'll want to open it up for all of you. Mindfulness of anger, acceptance, and practice with it, while also taking refuge in your own good heart. Coming back again and again to a sense of common humanity with others, a recognition of what they're carrying as well, empathy for them, coming back to compassion, to kindness, even to a vast kind of love that may feel like it is more than your own, coming back to that again and again, so you build up the body memory of the feeling of being at peace with a radiant heart again and again. That's a refuge. The feeling of it is a refuge. As you do it with me now, you can feel the strength of it. You can feel the calming of it. You can feel that it's a stable platform from which you can assert yourself effectively, more effectively, from that base, from that refuge of a peaceful heart, a peaceful and radiant heart. And as we do that, right, as we take refuge more and more ourselves in the feeling of this, well, we also become more and more a refuge for others. Someone they can lean on, someone who will absorb some of the stray neutrons in their nuclear reactor, like the graphite rods in a nuclear reactor, soaking up some stray neutrons, not adding our own reactivity to their reactivity, while still holding our ground, rested in that peaceful, loving heart. And as we be more and more of a refuge for them, then in addition to the service of that, it ripples out. And maybe over time, they can become even more and more of a refuge for us. So would anyone like to comment on practice in general, or ask a question about practice in general, or talk about this balance of anger and love? Great, Karen, I'm going to unmute you. Here we go. Karen.
So I've been thinking about a lot about the anger, and as well as how to do compassion. And I think that the way I'm coming to compassion is I feel like everyone in the world at the same time has suddenly figured out impermanence. Coming to terms with it all of a sudden, like, whoa, we're not here forever. Wait, what? No one told me. Can you speak a little about that impermanence and that sudden awareness? And maybe that's why everyone's so scared as well as so angry, because they haven't been doing your class for so long. They didn't know this was temporary.
Well, or, they were doing some other practice of their own. It's a beautiful point, and I think you're exactly right. I think we're amidst a lot of people who are shocked and stunned by all this, just like we are. And I look back on emails or conversations just a week ago, and it seems almost as if it's a different world. Mm-hmm. And I think a little bit akin to the Kubler-Ross so-called stages of grappling with, dying. The notion of, people describe them differently, but shock, and then anger, bargaining, despair, serenity, kind of like that. And I think in the beginning there was the denial, shock, denial, and then there was a certain bargaining, like, well, if we just wave our hands at it, it'll be fine. And now it's really sinking in. We're going to be, this is the new normal, and will be the new normal for really many months until individuals can have confidence of being able to go out amidst other people, and either they won't get sick, or if they do get sick, there will be, really good medical care for that. So we're going to be here for a while. So it is sinking in. And I think also about the ways in which, and you could see it even at the political level. I won't pick sides here, but you could see it at the political level. What Jean Piaget pointed out a long time ago about how we learn, two major ways of learning. And this might sound a little abstract, but boy, can you feel it, and you can see it in others. The first kind he noted was assimilation, where we incorporate new information, the new normal, into our existing framework. That's not cognitively demanding. It's an efficient way to learn. We slot it into familiar paradigms or schemes. Great. Then there's accommodation, in which, whoa, we have to shift our worldview. And I think, Karen, what you're speaking to is the ways in which many, many people are still trying to assimilate the new normal into their old frame of reference, which frankly, I think in many cases left out exactly what you're saying. It left out the reality of impermanence, and it left out the reality of interdependence. I mean, if there's any lesson from all this, which I think many are really resisting the learning of, it's the lesson of interdependence and the consequences, factually, for hollowing out deliberately at full speed in the last 3.5 or so years, in the federal government certainly, of the capacity in community to come together to take care of everyone on the basis of, or on top of, 40 years of motivated, policy-driven, politically driven attack on the fundamental fabric of the commonweal, the commonness of us all, and eating away at the bonds that tie people together. And we're inheriting the consequences now. It reminds me somehow of a pretty building that's been hollowed out by termites over the last 40 years. And it looks kind of good from the outside. Maybe it even has a fancy name on the billboard outside. And yet, when the storm comes, as storms always do, and we're in the midst of one now, the building, the fabric of the federal government, the fabric of the many, many layers of community in our country that have been eaten away, when the storm does come, the building has a really hard time withstanding it, and it starts to fall over. And we're seeing that now. And I think that's really hard for a lot of people who are deeply invested in a different worldview, or frankly invested in the worldview that I could shrug and be indifferent and it wouldn't matter. Bluntly, I could be among the 5 out of 6 young people, 18 to 25, who did not vote in the last presidential election. Shrug, I could get away with the big shrug. And I think it's coming crashing home for many, many people that you never could get away with the crashing shrug. You were just pushing that debt down the stream, down the road. And now, we've got to pay the piper. So I think that's tough for people. I think that's hard for people to assimilate it. So I try to recognize that it's hard for them to assimilate. I observe the arising thought in my mind, nah, I told you all along, like versions of that. But then I just try to let that go, disengage, because it's not helpful. And it breeds a lot of self-oriented processing, and move on. So I'm hopeful that enough people will accommodate and shift their paradigms, that this will be a painful lesson, but will lead to a new beginning. On the other hand, I have to also accept the fact that sometimes people really, really don't learn their lessons. And meanwhile, what can we do in our own practice, in our own mind, in our own body, in our own home, in our own kitchen, with our friends, with our family? What can we do ourselves meanwhile? So anyway, thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I'll bounce around different screens. Any hands up? Great. Carol.
Hey, hi, Rick and everyone. So I'm someone who've often, had the anger going and all that. And interestingly, while I feel it, that doesn't sort of stick in my head these days.
Right.
And one visual of where I see that's not very helpful, I think about back many months ago when Michael Avenatti was I guess, not having his legal problems yet. And he was torturing our president and saying, I'm living rent free in your head. I
Mm,
thought that was a pretty funny comment. But I think that's the ultimate of, if we let people live rent free in our heads, is that really what we want? And the anger holding on to us. So I've kind of let that go.
yeah.
And in terms of all the packages you carry, um, I also read a good book a long time ago, Rachel Naomi Remen, Kitchen Table Wisdom,
Yeah.
and all the people who had cancer that she counseled. And sometimes when you have something really big like that, that's when you get rid of the things in your life that aren't really, making sense. Maybe, kind of clearing the decks a little bit, giving yourself a break, making things a little easier.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
you. Really. And I would just add a little point that I just saw appearing in the chat. Uh, the cold rage was really interesting. I was really startled by how I felt. I slept well. I wasn't obnoxious, but I truly was there. And I think of that as a place sometimes that people can sit in. It's not a hot rage. That's what I think Rick Kruger brought up. It's not a hot rage. Hey, hi, Rick. Um, that but it feels very moral. And I think there's a place for knowing what you know and moving on from trying to convince yourself of what you know or cultivating the case. I think about those of us who, for a living, in my own case, for example, who are paid to develop a view about something that's useful, usually pretty correct, beneficial. You know, we're kind of used to that. And it's really easy to get caught up in the case, or because there's some kind of doubt deep down inside about what you actually feel and what you actually see, then people can get kind of, we want to convince ourselves in a funny kind of way. Whatever the reasons might be, I think when I refer to that kind of cold rage, or there are different versions of it, they don't involve any rage at all. There's a moral confidence. And you just kind of on. Like, I'm in this time, partly drawing on my own background as a rock climber, I'm really clear about the difference between no added risk and a little added risk. And if the consequences of adding a little risk are, I might get a sunburn, all right, I might take my chances. But if the consequence potentially of adding a little risk, adding more risk, are that someone might die or have a life-changing experience, including carried in the domino chain 3, 4, 5, 10 steps out, I'm crystal clear, no added risk unless I have to. It's it's okay. And I have no need to persuade anyone to that. I'm just really crystal clear that's how I'm operating. And it's not stressful for me. I actually feel safe. I feel prudent because of the ways in which I'm operating. And I just use that as an example. Again, while I think it's helpful to think in this way about added risk compared to no added risk, if it's not a big deal to avoid that added risk, right? If all you give up is convenience or preference, or a little bit of time, decide for yourself. Uh, the life you save may not be your own, right? I'm at peace with all that. And I think there's a place for this. I think, the topic of morality is very central in Buddhism. It's really the most fundamental pillar of all, sila, virtue, restraint. And we don't talk about it very much. I think actually it's an incredibly important form of practice to establish, grounded in your own integrity system, not the rules that you inherited necessarily from your parents or others, unless they really are true to your heart, but being true to our own integrity system and having the confidence in that, and not feeling like we need to prove it to other people or convince them even, but it's a resting. And I think that's actually a helpful intersection of anger and love, moral anger, moral outrage and love, this coming together that I'm talking about of moral confidence, where you just feel it. You're open. You're not walking around smug. I was in half a cult in my 20s. I know what that feeling is like. It's not that. It's not like I know the way it really is and you don't. I pity you. No, it's not like that. But there is this confidence. There is this confidence. And I encourage you to, see what that feels like for you and what it's like to sort of rest in it. Okay. Any comments so far? Oh, Michael Allison.
Hey, Rick, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, just thank you for being a refuge, really,
Oh,
of kindness and thoughtfulness, wisdom, and
thank you.
love. I mean, really. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment. For me, what's been most impactful is missing the actual human touch.
Yeah.
I'm still seeing people face to face and there's a distance and there's still social engagement, but the actual human touch is really impactful. And I'm hoping that that's what we learned from this too, is how we really need and embrace in that human touch.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. And
Yeah.
I can feel a compassion for you myself right now. And I think, just about every human really has a deep, 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 deep need for touch. And maybe all of us certainly. And that said, also people vary a little bit. Like, my wife is more extroverted than I am.
Mm-hmm.
This is landing harder. People vary in what they're missing, especially right now. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I can feel how this is landing on you. Okay, great. I see a hand down here. Naomi, unmuting you. Hi there, Naomi.
Hi, Rick. This is a question that I've struggled with in other contexts as well, but given what you spoke about earlier, I feel that this is absolutely the perfect forum. So some people are carrying a lot of packages and they have a lot of anger. And sometimes that anger becomes disruptive, not just to themselves, but to the people around them.
Mm.
So my question is, how do you deal with balancing your own self-protection and still having compassion and love for this person who's carrying a lot of packages?
Yeah, well, that's an art, isn't it? Huge question and a few kind of suggestions. So I had an experience once where I was climbing Mount Whitney by the face. And it was in October, and foolishly, my partner and I didn't realize that the snow chute that we were going to come down, which John Muir used to climb up to Mount Whitney, had iced in. So we were very slow coming down, and we were looking at very hazardous situation in rock climbing shoes, and that we we're going to be stuck overnight. And my friend, who had been my roommate for a while, was kind of startled by how I shifted, because we could not afford, I had a little more experience in the mountains than he had. We could not afford to lollygag around, and we had to be very careful in what we were doing in a whole new kind of way. And it wasn't personal. I wasn't angry, but I was really clear. We can get away with a certain amount of sloppiness when everything's fine. But under certain conditions, we're like, no, I just can't take that on board. We can't afford that right now. And it may well be that in current conditions, without falling into the pitfalls of reactivity and oversensitivity, still we just say to other people, I'm sorry, I'm going to disengage from this. This is not helpful for me. And I've got a lot I need to do right now. I'm carrying a lot of packages myself. I just can't add this right now. I just can't. And there's a way of saying that to people, I think, that can be tender while also being dignified and grave and clear, and can be expressed as a request. We are very, especially those of us who were raised by parents, most of us, we're pretty prickly, and we notice when we're being ordered in any way, shape, or form. And what I try to really do is stay inside the frame of the so-called request form, even though I know that, well, if the request isn't fulfilled, there may be some kind of consequence. It's not out of some sort of threat out of the Godfather that I'm going to make people an offer they can't refuse, right? But more like, I'm not trying to boss people around. We're pretty attentive to being bossed around. On the other hand, we may need to tell people, well, this is what I need to do for myself going forward about this unilaterally. So I would just say that. And then the other is to really ask ourselves, how are we building up what I call the capacity to be unirkable? I'm still working on it. When we're irked, right? We're kind of annoyed or miffed or startled or we're irked. It's a great word, irk. It is a feeling like orc from the Lord of the Rings, irk. And I'm working on real-time, unirkability, not out of numbing or, frism, but just how close. And then it becomes kind of a game. How rapidly can you disengage from a reaction pattern that's arising in you of irkedness? So it's still a work in progress for me, but that's another thing too, to think about what are the well springs of unirkability, right? And maybe it's just being a little more protective of the refuge of sleep. Like you could get away with 6.5 hours back in the day, but given everything, sorry, you just got to give up that extra little goodie you did for an hour before sleep that kept eating into your, hours per night. Because that's something you need to cultivate to feed the roots of unirkability. Maybe you need to have a little more protein, not let many hours go when you're running on empty, maybe you need to practice more consistently. I'm so delighted there's so many people here. And frankly, I say this as a teacher, keep practicing in community. Come back for the sake of others, if as well as for yourself. So I would just say that as well. And I take heart. I'll finish maybe on this point. Lately, I've been reflecting on all the people as we are being with each other here. You can see the faces if you're able to see that, if you're, or you can just imagine all the people that are with us right now. And there are, probably 1 million or so times that number of people, 180 million-ish, 181 million right now around the world who are grappling with this thing right now, like we are. Many of them are frontline workers, healthcare professionals, school teachers scrambling, parents scrambling, people scrambling to find work. They need to make a living somehow. A lot of us, and we can take heart in their efforts. You see what I mean? We can be aware of them. Like I take heart that you're here practicing with me. Like we can take heart, and we can take heart also in the knowing of our own goodness, our own scruffiness, our own moxie. We will get through this. We will get to the other side. Might be a little ragged around the edges sometimes, but we will get to the other side of this. This storm will pass, and we will still be here with each other. We can take heart in that. And as we take heart, we're less likely to be irked, less likely to be a jerk. Irk and jerk, they rhyme. Jerk and irk, don't be a irked jerk. Right? I'm going to try to remember that myself. And we can, just be better and better and happier and happier. And frankly, it's probably, I'm not sure the phrase is politically incorrect for me to say this, I'll finish. There's a lot about this weird time right now that's deeply interesting. And it's okay for multiple things to be true. It's horrifying. It's appalling. It's scary. It's interesting. It's amazing. And as the first person said, it's such an opportunity for learning at the personal and hopefully political level. How about we do what I do in my sitting group? This is my sitting group in a different kind of way. It's our sitting group. When we met in person, we would just sit for a minute at the end. So how about we sit for a minute together, just quietly. And then I'll unmute you all and we'll say goodbye. Hmm.